Welcome to the Block and Tackle Show, hosted by Karl Block. Karl is a partner in the law firm of Loeb and Loeb here in Los Angeles, California. He will be tackling some of the biggest issues in business today. Listen, learn, and enjoy as he leaves no stone unturned during deep conversations with some of today's most amazing business leaders. Welcome to the show.
Let's talk about AI. Okay. I should say, for my viewers and listeners, I've had so many people on talking about AI because it's being used in their business. And as we know, as much as we love the financial press, we don't know that they're always keeping abreast of everything that's going on with AI. You know, we had our colleague Frank D'Angelo on to talk about the copyright issues involved with AI, which are also evolving in real time right now. And now we have companies, mostly public companies, that have gotten in trouble, but, oh, I've got AI and it's gonna do this. And this is where you come in. So let's talk about where the SEC stands on this.
Sure. And this is, you know, and this happens periodically where the new big thing happens and everybody wants a part of it. And companies think, you know, if I say I'm involved in whatever that is, whatever the new big thing is, they're going to get press. They're going to get, you know, great, you know, the stock price is going to go up, what have you. 4 or 5 years ago, before the SEC really started scrutinizing cryptocurrency, it was cryptocurrency. Everyone was doing something in crypto. They were, you know, people would put out press releases. We're using crypto for this. We're using crypto for that. We're doing all this stuff. We're developing technology to make use of crypto. And that's what's happening now with AI. So what companies are starting to do is they're starting to put out disclosures, put out press releases that say we're using AI to do this. We're using AI to do that. We're developing AI to do something, and the SEC is starting to look at those disclosures and saying, are you really using AI? Is this an accurate description of what you're using AI to do? And you know, companies are starting to get comments from the SEC, and the SEC has put out investor alerts warning people to you know, be wary of companies that are talking about using AI, because it's such a hot topic right now, and everybody wants to be part of it. That you know, investors aren't necessarily delving as much as they should into what companies are actually doing.
No, I think that's true, and I mean, if I'm going to be charitable and say that people are creative, I've seen a number of suits where companies who you know, made fantastic projections, like just, I mean, maybe just as an aside, without getting into all the safe harbors and the protections of the Exchange Act or the Private Securities Litigation Reform Act, but just as an aside, if you are putting something in a filing that is just not in good faith, okay, it doesn't even have to be, you know, the most egregious fraud, but it's just not in good faith. Like, you have no reasonable person could have an expectation that you would hit these milestones, okay? There's a very good chance it's not going to end well for you, both on the regulatory side and the litigation side.
100% correct, right? Anything that's in a filing needs to have some basis in reality, right? You can't just put anything you want into a document. And you know, projections are a great example of that. When you have projections, you need to have them based on good, solid assumptions, right? Whatever they are for your particular industry, but they have to be based in reality, something that's achievable. They cannot be based on pie in the sky. We're just, you know, going to throw out a number out there because, you know, we think we should have 20% of the industry because of, because of who we are. That doesn't work. What it really needs to be is, right, we're assuming this. We have contracts that we expect to come in of this nature that will bring in this amount of money. Based on that, here's where we expect to be. Right? Your any projections, anything like that needs to be based on good, solid assumptions.
Yeah, and just like some of the mythology that we've talked about before, I think there are a group of people who say, well, if you put this forward-looking language disclaimer in it, you're okay. Well, not if you didn't act in good faith and you have no rational basis to say it.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure that that's part of what the SEC is looking at with these companies talking about AI.
Absolutely. 100%. It's just, the I think you're right. And, within the last couple of years or the last few years, the SEC has really focused more on this particular issue, right? Not simply allowing companies to get away with saying something and claiming it's a forward-looking statement, right? They're really delving deeper into why that particular statement was made, how it was made, whether it was based, as you said, in good faith, and that's really the key, right? You need to have some. There needs to be some rational basis for these. It just can't be something that you made up and threw on a page.
Yeah, and not to do wordplay, there doesn't just have to be a rationale. There has to be a rational basis.
Right. Right.
And I can see why this is going to be a hot button. And in reality, based upon all the people that I've had on that have talked about the commercial aspects of it, and somebody I'm going to have on pretty soon who's pretty high up in a very, very large tech company. Does anybody really, really know what's going to happen? How much of the commercial enterprises are going to be affected by AI 5 or 10 or 15 years from now? I mean, it's a frontier. It's still a frontier.
Absolutely. Right. And I think right, that's what makes some of this so difficult. Who really knows how this is going to develop, how these companies are going to monetize the technology, how companies are really going to implement it, and how much value that's really going to add. Right now, it's this great new thing. It looks wonderful. But are we ever going to get to the point where it's really making companies more profitable? It's really something that the AI companies are going to make a significant profit on. And that is still an open question.
Of course. And some companies, spoiler alert, some companies are going to be incredibly successful with their use of AI and some less so.
Absolutely.
And you could actually have fantastic AI developing some product that nobody wants, that it's either too expensive to have the product or there isn't enough demand for it. There's so many aspects to this. And while it's great, and it does have potential to do a lot of things. There's been a lot of things that have had potential that don't always get realized to the extent we think it will.
Absolutely. And going back to what we were just talking, cryptocurrency is a great example of that, right? Everybody thought it was going to change the world, and it really hasn't yet. Maybe it will, in another 10 or 15 years. But at this point, I think it has not achieved what people thought it was going to.
Not yet. And even, by the way, and not to make this all about crypto, but even the case of people saying, oh my goodness, there's some countries with horrible, horrible fiat currencies. They're currencies that aren't worth anything. And there'd be greater commerce with that country if you could use a cryptocurrency as an exchange, if you don't want to use what I personally love, dollars.
Right.
In your exchange. Hey, this could be a cool thing. But even so, and you never know. And getting full circle to where we talked about, when you're raising money, when you're soliciting investments when you're investing, this is a whole nother ball of wax, and you have to be very, very careful in terms of the issuer's disclosures and complying with applicable securities laws.
100% right.
Okay. So we can probably then talk about brokers and their record keeping. and I will say there. Do you, off the top of your head, have an estimate of how many people there are in this country with Series 63 licenses? I mean, there's so many of them, right?
There are a lot.
and when you have so many people in that area, I would think that compliance issues generally can be more challenging, despite the best efforts of government regulators to make sure people comply. And then, of course, sometimes they get in trouble. Sure. So what are you, well, let's talk about, why don't you talk about the enforcement actions against brokers and dealers?
So, and I think this is a situation where, modern technology has really made it difficult for brokers and dealers to comply with regulations, right? And, these regulations were written, I don't know, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, whenever they were first put into place. And, texting was simply not something that happened. But, we just, and this is over the last few years, the SEC has really gone after brokerages and dealers, broker dealers for not maintaining accurate records of communications with clients. And the vast majority of it is because brokers were taking orders via text, or doing something via text that needed to have been saved and was not. And it's hundreds of millions of dollars that brokers are having to pay for these violations. I think the most recent one I saw happened in August. It was almost $400 million over a number of brokers, but huge amounts are in terms of fines, and it's for something as simple as record keeping.
Now, and I mean, look, in this one sense, if a broker has a client who has their cell phone number, is the client always going to call or always going to email and say, I want to do this? I mean, texting has commercial application, but the issue is what happens to the text, right?
That's exactly right. Right. How do you save that text? How is it recorded? How is it, maintained in a way that complies with the law? And look, as lawyers, we have the same problems with clients texting us, and we're like, it creates a difficult situation because it's not a communication that's in the normal stream of things that's saved and recorded. And for us, we're not required to save those communications, right? So it's a less problematic situation, and even we are a little worried about it. But for people that have to actually maintain the records and record things, it's a huge problem.
And again, it's regulatory compliance.
Absolutely. It's compliance with regulations, right? Brokers are required to maintain records of, communications with clients. It's just what the law requires.
If you had to predict, do you think more of the major houses will end up having technology so that the text is saved some way, or that they...
that has to be the way that this goes, right?
Yeah.
There's going to have to be some technology that's developed that will actually record texts that come into a broker's phone. Now, the question, of course, is how do you deal with personal text versus business text, and how is that divided up? And It's a really complicated issue, but it's something that is going to have to be solved by technology at the end of the day.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And the idea of telling a client that you want to keep, I'm sorry, you can't text me.
Right.
You can call me during office hours.
Right. It just doesn't work in the modern world.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm sure that there's a number of them that just don't give out their cell numbers, but then there's a number that do, and
absolutely,
and that creates the issue. How, I mean, do you think this was we've warned you now, basically, to the community, and we don't think we're going to have to do more? Or do you think, I mean, and again, I know this is reading tea leaves, but do you think there's going to be a lot more of this?
So this has actually been going on for the last 2 or 3 years with the SEC. And there were a couple of cases brought in 2023, which were also for hundreds of $millions. And I recall even cases in 2022. So I think this is an ongoing process with the SEC, and people are still not able. Either they're not able to comply, or they're not willing to comply. So I think the SEC is going to keep pushing on this issue until they start seeing people take it seriously and start complying.
Okay. I mean, it's good to know, and I'm glad this is one thing that we're telling people during this podcast. Okay, so let's talk about disclosures and new rules about disclosures. Why don't we take cyber? And I'll just say that with respect to disclosures, I sympathize with everyone who's put in this position of figuring out what you say and how much you say. But let's talk about the rule regarding your cybersecurity issues for public filers.
Sure, and this is actually something that the industry is still struggling with to figure out exactly how it works and what it means, because it is really a complicated issue. But basically, companies are now required to report material cybersecurity incidents on a Form 8K, which sounds great, but determining what is material and what is not material is really a complicated issue. And the SEC, to its credit, did try to build some flexibility into the rule in that you don't have to report a cybersecurity incident until you know it's material. But for companies, at what point does that happen? What is materiality based on, right? It's not just financial. It's also based on really amorphous topics like reputation and things that can otherwise affect the company's business that aren't necessarily monetary. So there's a lot of things going into that, and companies are struggling a little bit with deciding exactly how these things are supposed to be disclosed.
What is a challenge from my perspective is, you probably know that if you're a company and you have had a cyber breach, you are encouraged and maybe required to report to authorities beyond the SEC about this. And some of those authorities may not want you to do an incredibly robust disclosure of every detail of this and what the secondary and tertiary potential ramifications are, because maybe they don't want the hacker to know what is known.
Right.
And so now you have a company that is, that has, one branch of government that may want you to keep it under wraps as much as possible, and another branch of government that says, disclose what's material. And also, as you know, I mean, we just had one particular country who has entities within the country that sounds like Harpoon, but it's not, has broken into certain things where even these very, very sophisticated companies don't even know the extent of the breach. And so, where do you go with that disclosure? Hypothetically, where do you go with that disclosure, and how much do you disclose? And are you going to have to keep doing 8Ks, every time there's something new?
I think this is part of the struggle, right? I think, and one of the interesting things was that some companies, when the new rules came into effect, actually they decided, we're just going to report every cybersecurity disclosure, whether it's material or not, under the new item for cybersecurity disclosures. And the SEC, and as a way to cover themselves, right? They don't want to get in trouble with the SEC. They're not sure if it's going to be material or not, or when that decision is going to be made. So let's just disclose it all. And the SEC said, no, we don't want that, right? This is supposed to be material disclosures, right? From the SEC's perspective, right? They only want things that should really affect the company, that would be important for an investor to know. And by disclosing it all, disclosing every little thing that happened, would dilute the significance of a cybersecurity disclosure. So I think that's again something that's really tough to decide. What should be disclosed, when it should be disclosed, how much should be disclosed, and it's something we're all still trying to figure out.
Yeah, I mean that's what bothers me. I mean, I think it's very fair to want to look out for the investor, but these cybersecurity breaches don't come in a nice little box, and you can figure out and you can figure out who else it's going to affect, what information was stolen, and again, you've got other potential wings of the government that may not want that disclosure to be robust.
Right. No, that's right. And I think, I think there's a fair, I think the SEC probably does not require something to get into the technical details, right? I think we're looking more at broader disclosures about, how it would impact the company, not necessarily details of how the breach took place,
sure.
or the technicalities of it. So, I think whether there certainly could be other agencies that say, we don't want you to disclose this yet for XYZ reason. So, and you're absolutely right. There's going to be a push-pull there. But I in terms of the detail, I don't think the SEC is looking for that. They're really looking for.
I'm sure, but when you get below like how much of your business, there are plenty of companies that have different business units.
Sure.
When you could start getting into a lot of stuff that in theory the SEC might want to be detailed when you may not even know. That's number one. You literally may not even
100%.
know. And even if you know some of it, you may not be able to accurately predict the consequences. You just may not know.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's part of the struggle, right? You simply don't know. And then you could be questioned as to when you knew that it was material or not, right? Which is such a struggle, right? Like, how do we, materiality by itself is amorphous. And then when something becomes material, who knows? And how you make that determination. There's so many amorphous variables in this disclosure that it makes it a very, very difficult disclosure to navigate.
Yeah, and I guess, this will be another one of these evolving things where perhaps the SEC will refine rules as we see more of them. Okay, so let's talk about climate disclosures. Another one that is not super easy to disclose with any accuracy. So I believe the SEC promulgated a rule, and then there were some lawsuits.
Yeah, so this is a really interesting situation. So the SEC, after considering it for a long time and really reducing the rule from what was proposed, put out the new rule, and basically the industry was ready for it. Filed lawsuits immediately, and basically the SEC felt it had to stay enforcement of it. So because of all the lawsuits, all the questions, all the issues that came out of these potential disclosures. So right now we're waiting for resolution of the suit of these suits to see whether companies are going to have to make climate-related disclosures.
Yeah, I think that for a lot of companies, to the extent it deals with their supply chain, that can be incredibly costly, incredibly imprecise, incredibly hard to monitor. And, it's a lot of these they're just not easy.
No, and I think that's right. I think the problem with the request of disclosures was it's really looking through to suppliers and things that it was going to be really hard for companies to be able to comply with. And I think companies that have sort of direct are having direct impacts from climate change are making some of those disclosures already. But sort of looking behind and looking at people you do business with was going to make it an almost impossible task for companies to comply with.
I mean, you could have a supplier who refuses to give you a certificate. What's the consequence?
Right.
Unless their host government requires that compliance, what's the consequence?
That's right.
And even with the energy companies, I'm sure that they are, so far they seem to be doing well with the disclosures, but new information comes out all the time. There, very little of this stuff is black and white, of course, and especially to what degree it affects the climate in a very deep level. Not easy, just not easy.
No, and right, there could be huge differences depending on who's doing the analysis and what you're looking at. So, again, like the cybersecurity disclosures, it's really very amorphous, and it's tough for companies to come to firm conclusions about how this is impacting them.
Okay, so Giovanni, let's briefly talk about some of the new rules with respect to SPACs.
Sure. So earlier this year, after a long period of time where the SEC had proposed rules out but didn't come up with final rules were finally adopted. And for SPACs, it's requiring a whole new set of disclosures in their filings with the SEC, both at the IPO stage and when you're doing a de-SPAC. And the disclosures, while perhaps not wholesale departures from what had been done historically, do increase what companies are required to do, and we're seeing increased comments from the SEC both at the IPO stage and de-SPAC stage based on these new rules.
And what kinds of things are they focused on?
So one of the big things that they're focused on is disclosures related to sponsor teams and who the beneficial owners of the sponsors are. Historically, sponsors weren't required to sort of get into the nitty-gritty of who the beneficial owners were, right? You said who was running things, and that was basically it. The new rules require disclosure of who's actually investing in the sponsor, who is who is actually the force, the money behind the sponsor and the SPAC. And those disclosures, again, new rules came into effect this summer. So we're still learning about how the SEC is looking at them, what they're going to require. But it looks like we're going to be required to have some fairly robust disclosures about the money people behind SPACs.
Okay. I wonder if that's because they are concerned that they're lining up the de-SPAC partners before.
That very well could be. I mean, that's something that, as I'm sure you know, there've been a number of investigations, from public investigations, that the SEC has told us about. And I happen to know there are a number of ongoing investigations that are not publicly available with respect to that very issue. So it's very possible that is what they're getting at.
Okay. And what about reverse mergers?
So in connection with the SPAC rules, the SEC also put some new rules into place that affected reverse mergers. Historically, when you were doing a reverse merger, you could basically do a deal, complete a transaction, within a couple of weeks. You didn't have to register with the SEC. You would file an 8K after the deal was done, and that was it.
Yeah.
With the new rules, you are actually required to file a registration statement prior to the reverse merger to register not the issuance of the shares to the new, the acquired business shareholders, but to register the shares of your already outstanding shell company shareholders. The SEC is basically taking the position that when you do a reverse merger, you're making a new offer to your already outstanding shareholders, and you're required to file a registration statement, which basically means that you have a several month long process before you can complete a reverse merger.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Okay, so look, this has been fun. I think it's been informative. I think the viewers and listeners are really gonna like it. I really appreciate you coming. If you have questions, you can reach me at carl@blockandtackleshow.com. And that's block, A-N-D, blockandtackleshow.com. No ampersand. And I will pass them on to Giovanni if he wants or if it's necessary. And thank you. Appreciate everybody for watching and listening. And stay tuned for upcoming events. Thanks for watching, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. If you want more info on the show, please visit blockandtackleshow.com. And you can also email me at carl@blockandtackleshow.com. Thanks for tuning in.